Oh, there. Okay. I don't say anything you don't want possibly seen by somebody who's looking at the old stuff.
Hello.
You want water? All right. So,
Because
yes.
yeah, Andy said he couldn't make it and Marie said. So
Good afternoon.
It was from the email. Cool. That's a bad chance for you.
can you hear us, Peter?
I can hear you.
Oh, we can hear you too. Great. Peter, I'm sorry about dropping you off that email. I don't know what I was thinking. I wrote it to you. And then it's like, I looked at it today. I was like, oh, no wonder he's emailing me. Didn't get it.
Not a problem at all. And I'm assuming when appropriate, I can give a very brief, there's a lot of stuff in the tables, so I don't want it to be too overly overwhelming.
I didn't read them in detail, but I thought they were pretty good.
Yeah, and I think the kind of that main summary on them is the table version 1 and 2 were just to diagram the existing code. So the step 3 versions really are the ones that I think that we're aiming at. And when relevant, I can explain the logic behind the formatting.
Oh, there's not a reason we can't start 3 minutes early.
You're not supposed to start till 5.
All right, well, then we'll sit here and not talk about what we're not going to talk about.
Sorry.
That's all right. It's hard not to,
Yeah.
but staying inside the rules, you gotta kind of Talk about cruises or weather or anything not on the agenda.
For that hot cheese, did you get one? Is
Yeah.
that why you're, is
That was
that why
good.
you're sniffling?
Yeah, well,
You should be here, Peter. The cheese is great.
I was,
I
send this picture.
I do like myself a cheese plate, so sorry.
What are you having for dinner tonight? Because you always get dinner about the time we have to leave and you're being served dinner.
I think tonight's going to be Papa Murphy's take and bake pizza.
Ah, that works.
Nice. Where's your dog? Your partner in crime.
He is at he's at home lounging on someone's bed probably. When we're not there, if we sneak into the house, we can hear him jump off the bed and come up to meet us.
Yeah, sounds about right. Sounds familiar. I wasn't there. No. A dog shape.
Yeah,
Whatever.
and fur.
Yeah.
Wasn't me.
Oh. Okay. We're down to seconds. Yeah, all dropping. Oh, great. And then find out all of the- It's the longest minute.
When you're holding a plank or something.
Oh, yeah.
That's the longest.
Those are the longest minute. Absolutely. There we are. All right, 5 o'clock. Call order. Roll call. We're all here. But I know the rest of-
Actually, Marie Holst and Andy Masco are both absent next week.
Great. Absent as planned. We do have a quorum. What's happening? Okay, start off with approval agenda. Any changes to our agenda? Any objections? And what's I sold? Agenda is approved. Approval of minutes. Anybody review previous meeting minutes? They're really detailed. What's that good?
I'd like to make a motion to approve last meeting's minutes.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded that we approve the meeting minutes. Any objection to approving the minutes as read or as printed? Hearing no objections, we'll continue on. All right.
I'd like to make a motion to go to the committee of the whole.
Second.
All right. Move and second. Any objections? Go in the committee of the whole. Great. We're in the committee of the whole. Okay. So first of all, one thing before we turn Peter loose, what do we want to bite off today? They'd love to say, here's what we want to bite off today and complete it and go home. This is Sunday. So I feel like we need to tackle the tables that Peter sent out. Still with us, Peter?
I'm here.
Okay, great. I think if we can put a dent in table 3. Let's see if we can make it. I mean, I like the way it spells it all out. And I think in some ways you make the table say what you want, make the code say what the table says. And really can get there and clean up any wording. I don't know if it's finished on the night, but I think. Anybody else think anything?
I just think there is a little bit of sense of, urgency to get it done for the best builders start. I'm happy, so.
Yeah, the days are getting longer.
Yeah.
Because you still have all the process of getting it through planning and getting it through the council, and the council has to see it twice.
So we have 3 months. So
It depends on the timing.
Timing.
Yeah.
And it depends on if planning only has to see it once.
Yes.
Okay. So if you have planning only seeing it once and then have it on council's agenda right away.
Yeah.
So
As long as they have the two the next month, you could get it done the next month.
Whack, second one's done. And then also would encourage as many of us that can, we can talk about this later, to be at the planning meetings and at the council meeting, or at least the second one. It's most important. The first one just gets
Yep.
just gets
Just that.
moved through, so everybody has a chance to look at it twice. But the second one is the most important for the council, is planning for sure. Did you catch all that, Peter?
I did.
Um, so that's that. Peter, will you honor us with your gift and talk us through it?
I can, yes. So I think what I'd probably start off with, Tina, there's a fair amount in this, and the intent of this was to compile things from different sections. So this didn't necessarily make many judgment calls when it came to changing quantitative intent, and I can hit where it does. For the first table here, the intent of it was that, so speaking of site perimeter, the current code only has site perimeter landscape adjacent to a road right-of-way, and then that is modified with buffers. My feeling was we looked at it previously, the three types of buffers had three different widths and three different quantities of landscape, but there wasn't necessarily that much difference between buffer type 2 and buffer type 3. So what we did was we combined them and made those the hardest standard, which is L3. And then similarly, then type A buffer became L2 landscape. I think that I made the mistake of not including in this the widths and the plant quantities for L2 and L3. No, L2 and L3 has it in here, yes. And we can go through this when we get to them, but that's the number one thing, is that we turned buffer landscaping to just to be a site perimeter type and made it L2 and L3. Then another thing to point out on this table 1 of step 3 is it looks like the way code is written right now is that it's incumbent upon the developed parcel to buffer itself from the adjacent use. So to be very clear with that, if you're developing a commercial property, if you're developing a residential property that's adjacent to industrial, the code is telling you that you have to put the buffer on your own land.
Well, but I don't think so, or at least I don't think that's what it meant to do. I guess
Okay,
you
so
said
that's just one thing we might want to add clarification. So then to confirm, is the intent that the buffer goes on the buffer goes on the parcel which has the worst impact. So if you're building a residential property adjacent to a commercial parcel, if they haven't put in a buffer yet or haven't been required to, you don't have to do it on your residential property.
That's correct.
Okay.
Do they
perfect.
have to then?
No, no one has to, because at that point, it's assumed when you bought that lot for residential development, you knew what was next door.
Okay.
So if you
Okay.
didn't like it, you shouldn't buy it.
Perfect. And then what I'll point out in this end, so I developed this table, I think, correct to that. So on the left-hand side is the proposed development. So if you're developing single family, you only have to put in a buffer if you're adjacent to multifamily. Is that correct? Or does that?
Single family really doesn't have to put in any buffers.
Okay, perfect. So
And
then
a
that's
duplex doesn't either. So
Okay, so
single
that's-
family and duplex are both exempt
perfect.
from a requirement.
And then, so the bottom line then, if you're doing multifamily residential, are you required to do a buffer if you're adjacent to single family?
Yes, or a
Okay.
duplex.
Perfect. Okay. So I found one mistake in this diagram then. Otherwise, industrial next to commercial, you put in L3. Industrial next to anything, you put in the biggest buffer. Then commercial next to residential, you put in the biggest buffer. And then single family doesn't have any buffers. Multifamily does, adjacent to single family residential.
Wait, what was the last one? Sorry.
Multifamily adjacent to single-family residential puts in a buffer.
Or duplex. So single
Yes,
family
yes,
duplex.
yes,
Yeah.
and duplex,
Okay,
yeah.
all right. Yep.
Where is it? Is it listed somewhere, the L2, L3, somewhere clearly?
Yeah,
or
it's
am I
the
just
second page.
missing?
The second page
Of step one?
of all of them.
Okay.
So there are just 3 variations of the same
Yeah.
layout.
So
Okay.
what I would, and I think, again, I did this, or we were doing this quickly, so it's pretty, a little bit confusing. So L1 is this one that we have right now, and we had discussed making it an 8-foot minimum average for L1. I think that's what we talked about previously. Tina, is that correct? That's the one that's, L1 has typically been 10 foot. That's your typical site perimeter.
Sorry, I'm trying to find.
You were referring
Are
to
you
step
seeing
one.
something?
Sorry,
Yeah.
step 3, table 2.
Oh, yeah, he's in step 1 now. So,
Up to step 3.
Okay.
Yeah, so for the
Where does
moment,
it
I'm ignoring
say-
step 1 and step 2 because they're redundant.
Types of landscaping on the top.
Yep.
L1.
Gotcha.
oh, okay. Yeah, yours is printed in color and mine's in black and white.
Okay,
so
no
it's threw
problem.
me off. I
Sounds
was like,
good.
is that the same? Yeah,
Oh,
okay.
sorry.
So I don't have my notes on the widths, but if that's what you recall, I can go back through it. I haven't had that time to go through and like look at it specifically. I had a couple questions.
Perfect.
But
And all,
otherwise,
basically what I'll summarize is then, so the intent for L1, whether it's 8 foot or 10 foot, it's the narrowest planting bed. And then L2 should state, I think, 15 feet. And then L3 would be 20 feet.
okay, so that's an increase over what the code requires now, right?
Well, so L2 and L3 are a merging of types B and C.
Got it. Yeah, whereas A right now is 12, B is 16, and C is 20.
Yep.
But you merged B and C together and made them L3.
Functionally, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And these are all the quantifications that are up for checking as people look at this. So that's so the first table that I went through, the L1, L2, L3, tells you what landscape you're supposed to put beside the right of way or adjacent to a parcel that has a harsher view. And then again, that was step 3, table 1. This is pretty much consistent, I think, with the intent of code, Tina, but this is where I think we would rely upon you to poke holes in this stuff.
Yeah, I looked at it briefly and it seemed to capture, I think, the intent of what the groups talked about. I think it's kind of a little bit, it includes some modifications, right? Yeah, because like you were talking the widths and some stuff.
Yes, and yep. And then the last thing that first table shows is that adjacent to a right of way, it's all L1 landscape. You know, no matter whether you have commercial, industrial, or residential, adjacent to the right of way, it has a particular landscape. Except that this is really confusing to walk through. Sorry.
You're doing good. Thank you.
Okay. So with that, if we go to table 2.
Is that step 2?
Table 2.
No,
step 3.
sorry, ignore
step
steps 1 and 2, where everything is in step 3.
Those are fine. So
Yeah.
I do like the fact that this one's actually a little thinner, lighter than the other one.
One
That's good.
page less, smaller type though.
Yeah.
That's right.
Okay, so then I'll summarize it. So and Tina, again, this is basically aimed at you to make sure this is correct. So for L1 landscape, this is the same as existing site perimeter. What this does is it reduces it to 8 feet as a minimum average. And then for plant materials, it says 1 tree and 6 shrubs per 30 linear feet. 6 shrubs is the equivalent of 2 shrubs per 100 square feet. I thought that it would be better to use the same measurement instead of adding square foot versus linear foot.
Yeah.
The plant requirements don't change. The plant requirements don't really change. And then what I put into this is the optional design standard. Industrial properties are allowed to change their approach to it, so that becomes an optional design standard to L1. And then I didn't find anything for this where it had exemptions or a use-based modifier for this. An exemption is where in code currently in another section it says you don't have to do this landscape because of this. So now it'll be listed directly in this table. And then a use-based modifier is if there's something of a particular use, a coffee shop, a bank, where there would be a modifier to this code based on that use. So then L2, what this should show is it should say should be 15 feet instead of 10. My apologies. And these are the ones, Tina, where I think that figuring out the specific widths for any of these is a kind of follow-up technical discussion. As a reminder for everybody, any buffer landscape requires a fence. So L2 and L3 include a fence within them, in addition to the landscape material. So the next section for plant materials, this again is us taking that buffer table and translating it to the number of trees and shrubs. And then there's some language in here that may go elsewhere because it relates to growth and similar. Again, this is a work in progress. The plant material requirements haven't necessarily been developed yet. They might mimic what's in L1. An optional design standard has the 6-foot high screening fence. Some of this is copied from other codes. Since there is already a fence required for L2 and L3, this is redundant. Something Tina or the committee to consider is that for L2 buffer, should it always have a fence, or should it be a wider amount of land? And if someone chooses to go narrower, then they put a fence in. So that would be my, the one question for this is probably what I would recommend would be if this is a 15-foot landscape bed, but if you want to do 10, you put in a fence instead of requiring a fence both for L2 and L3. And for example, L2 happens between residential and commercial. L3 is between residential and industrial, so there will always be a fence around industrial. But whether there's a fence around commercial would be dependent upon whether somebody wanted to do 15-foot or 10-foot.
I have a question for you, Peter. It's probably just me overlooking it, but where does it say that the fence is a requirement?
That's probably an omission on my part. So for
Oh, okay. I was like, I'm looking for it, but I'm not seeing it.
I thought we had quite a bit of discussion that we didn't want to include fence in the.
Yeah,
Well, that's in the perimeter.
Yes.
Along the road, but this is between two,
Side
an
by
intense
side.
use and a lower intense use.
yeah,
So I- Yeah.
Commercial versus residential.
Yeah. I don't know that we got into that so much, into that buffer between uses. We started talking about, I have some notes there.
Yeah.
I know there was some, still have it on my notes
And then,
to talk about, what about if you're commercially zoned and you develop residential?
yeah,
Does the commercial
Sure.
have to buffer you?
no,
Right, and so I don't think the groups formalized that particular conversation. I think that fits in perfectly with what Peter's talking about is, I think commercial and industrial shouldn't have to have that, even a fence between them, because
not unless they want
you're
it.
not usually worrying about noise or visual, visual barrier. I mean, it's to help. None of it totally does it, but between residential and commercial, especially if you're like dealing something like a Walmart, you're gonna want a significant buffer
Right, but if
between
you're
there.
a-
Walmart.
so then
next
that would
to
be
warehouse
my
here.
first question is then, is there always a fence for commercial? And let's talk about commercial. So industrial always has a fence regardless. Commercial, should it always have a fence, or should there be a trade-off between width of buffer and having a fence?
It depends on the type.
I
of
think,
commercial.
well,
That's an
because I
example
think
of
about
that.
just the backyard of my office, because I live there. We have a fence. We didn't always have a fence. Time wasn't required. We put up a fence because to keep the residential out,
Mhm.
because they're stinkers. It's a nice way of saying. You know, when you have 12-year-olds sticking things in the fins, the air conditioning unit, the fence saves you a lot of hassle. But if you've got 15 feet or whatever, and then how is the fence? Does it be opaque? What is the defined fence? Is it split rail?
Well, it does say opaque in the
Okay.
code now. So it's either an opaque fence, a wall, or a berm, or a combination
But
of.
if I have an opaque
From-
fence, does it need to be more than 8 feet? I mean, how deep does it need to be? Can the fence be on the line, property line?
If it's that buffer, and that's another thing, the code right now isn't as clear as I wanted it to be as to which side you put your landscaping on. Is it on the residential side or is it on the interior, the commercial side? So that needs to be clarified,
Right.
which side do you put it on?
Because if I'm putting up a block wall, and Peter,
Yeah, what's the
help me out
point?
here. So if I put up a block wall and I put it, a couple inches behind the property line, does it matter what goes on my side of the fence?
And so what I'm hearing is there are a couple questions within this is width of buffer, type of fence. And if you have a site obscuring fence, what contribution does the landscape actually make to making the area look nicer?
Right, especially in the case of like a drive-through. I mean, there's whatever inch you can get out of that sometimes.
Yeah.
But in the case of, I just don't know. I mean, there's lots
And
of.
that is one of the goofy things in Anchorage code example. If you're doing a self-storage yard, and let's say you're adjacent to a residential area, you wind up having 15 feet of landscape beyond the fence because the landscape is put on the other side. So it does provide adjacent benefit to the other lots, but they're typically fenced anyways because people have fenced yards. So you wind up with this kind of a weird natural landscape. For whatever that's worth.
I love how you call natural landscape. I would call it unmaintained. But you call it what we want, I guess. But it also is a breeding ground for tent people. Can be.
So Peter, is there any, I mean, you said Anchorage puts it on the other side. I think ours makes people think or leads you to believe that it has to be on the outside if it doesn't outright say it. I think the vegetation, if it's evergreen, helps with noise attenuation, and the trees do get taller, so it does over time create a taller barrier. So like if you have more than a single story home, you get some vertical height for a visual barrier there. So, but does it matter which side of the fence it's on? I mean, it seems like it should be on the interior. Because you're not along a road. So what's the benefit? Yeah, like you said, to the other neighborhood, it makes it look like they have to maintain it now.
So part of, I think I'd mentioned alternative equivalent compliance before as a way to work with staff to have some flexibility. The measurements that are often used for that are the environmental benefit. So the trees and the shrubs help to keep dust out of the air. That green space helps with percolating water. So there's the benefits of the material itself. You're spot on as the trees grow taller, they help to provide screening or benefit. Trees, until you get to like 50 or 100 feet of fairly dense forest, don't mitigate sound very much, but they have a psychological benefit for sound. So if you take a decibel meter, it doesn't necessarily help very much. So what I think you nailed is that if it's on the inside of the fence, it means that it's easier to maintain. The property owner has control over it, that it doesn't have homeless issues or kids lighting fires. And it still provides an environmental benefit. But as we get into, I think our process for updating the code, we're going to come back to a couple things to really figure out the quantification. So let's say we put up this fence on the property line, put the trees and the shrubs on the inside. The trees will provide benefit in the future, but the shrubs won't. So maybe there's a question that shrubs aren't required if the landscape goes on the front of the fence. So there's a little bit of deep, like, what does this stuff mean?
And then we have topography so much too
Oh, yeah.
that gets it weird.
Elevation changes.
Because if you're dealing with a flat piece of property and you go with evergreen shrubs, then they will eventually create a hedge, which will help with noise, at least from that 6 to 8 foot height. You know, they could be allowed to grow that high. But that the commercial site could be taller than you, or it could be lower than you, and it's really not serving any purpose. So I think I like what Peters has said all these different times about the optional design standards, to give those optionals when you're dealing with these unusual, you know, topographical situations and things. Or if you choose to do a block wall instead of a fence, if you're going to do a solid wall, that's better than any fence and tree could be. I mean, shrub's not going to help that.
And you're very true is that there are projects where there's a slope with a fence at the bottom, and it makes no sense.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, that doesn't help.
So then, so back to the table then so L1 has parallel, we've talked about it for what we talked about previously. L2 and L3, my recommendations for a place to start is L2 15 feet wide, L3 20 feet wide. It sounds like that a fence for both of them is a minimum. Or like I said before, do we trade width for fencing, or do they just, commercial and industrial should have a fence?
Seems like if we remove the requirement for a fence, it doesn't really do a whole lot just to widen the landscape bed without requiring additional plantings.
What about berming? What about, yeah.
Yeah. Well, and we could also, and so so buffer landscape underneath the optional design standard, it says that, you know, a site obscuring fence can be used in lieu of 5 feet of planting. 5 feet of bed. We can also increase the plant material. It's easy to say a 6 foot tall site obscuring fence with the addition of one evergreen tree per 30 feet or something, where we can start to make those trade-offs.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking is, increasing the amount of trees in particular since they're tall, right?
Yeah. Or I should say that if you put a fence in, you can reduce the number of trees, but that means we want to increase the number of trees for the wider.
Right.
And so, and Tina, I would come again back to your experience on this, is in Anchorage, often when people are developing, that 5 feet or 10 feet, if you look at both sides of a property, can make a big difference for how well someone could develop their property for parking lots or development.
Yeah, oh yeah.
For sure.
Do you think that within the city of Wasilla, that 10 feet would be meaningful?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, because
Okay.
a lot of our lots are smaller, so they're always looking for ways to maximize that usage.
Okay. And something else to point out in this is we have provided a use-based modifier for L3 in this. And what this says is if you increase your 6 foot height fence on an industrial property to 8 feet tall, that's another way to get a reduction of 5 feet. So I don't know if a taller fence is also an attractive benefit or not. And I think I thought I heard you guys say that fencing between industrial sites or between industrial and commercial, you didn't think that was of benefit. So no fencing between those two types.
I mean, we don't have much industrial anyway.
Yeah.
So we've got the airport, there's, you know, just that little bit of commercial, and then you got the wastewater plant, and then up on Mystery. So you're not dealing with a lot of land, and even up there doesn't sit next to commercial really. That
Okay.
area is prime to go all industrial anyway, but.
Area across from the VFW where like there's the pipe.
Oh, that's
trees.
commercial. Oh my God, this map's not up to date. We did do Centaur as industrial. So there's some there. But it's mainly the city lot on the north side, and the south side is the private businesses. And then they've got that big bluff behind them. So really that serves as a barrier. There's no commercial that would be behind them. I guess there's a little bit of, that's mainly industrial on the other side, maybe one commercial, one on the corner. I just don't think it's that big of a deal.
Okay.
It's
So then
probably
really
more important to focus on industrial screening their storage yards than technically buffering. So that you're
Okay.
not, they're not wide open with just all their piles of everything exposed.
Well, I know in the borough alone, if you have a junkyard, you have to have a fence.
Hmm.
It's not a question.
Is it a
So then
solid fence
that-
or is it a chain link?
I think so.
Is it?
So that becomes a use specific modifier, is that if it's a storage yard or that use, then you do need a fence in either commercial or industrial.
So what,
And commercial doesn't allow outdoor storage, so you don't have to worry about commercial from that standpoint.
Okay.
that's my question is,
Not right now, it doesn't.
what defines commercial versus residential uses? What goes on in there?
I walked out
I
without
mean,
the code.
we got an airport over here, that's obvious.
Industrial versus commercial.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, that's what I was supposed to.
Industrial versus commercial.
So
What did I say before?
Residential.
industrials.
That's kind of obvious, though, isn't it?
That's like, where does this question come from?
No, commercial, what can you do in industrial?
They can't do in commercial.
Thank you.
Your biggest things are outdoor storage of materials,
Okay.
product, not, but the weird twist is you can have heavy equipment rental and sales,
Right.
which is big and huge and sticks out everywhere. So kind of a weird anomaly there. And you can have noisy, a lot of truck traffic, all of that kind of stuff is more industrial type than commercial. Commercial is retail sales, goods and services. It's more geared toward a consumer.
Manufacturing and
Yeah.
material lay down storage. Okay, it could be industrial.
But
But
we
you-
cross that line a lot because people keep it inside and then they,
But you got SBS with all their outdoor storage, but I mean, I want lumberyards around,
right.
all my stuff.
I think the difference there is that it's
in a rack.
it's for storage for sales, whereas industrial use would be storage for.
Actually, I think they were before 96, so
Yeah, SBS.
I think they wouldn't be allowed
I guess
today and
that's the difference I would make on it, is that it's basically an outdoor, retail facility versus just being an outdoor storage for manufacturing, like if it were a truss plant. That would be more of an industrial use
Okay.
than a commercial.
yeah, because it's their product, their
Like a store.
versus their supplies for the work.
Right. Otherwise, like Home Depot, Lowe's,
Yeah,
they
right,
have
yeah.
exterior storage too.
They're all under commercial.
Right.
They do start crossing the line. The other thing is shipping containers. Shipping containers aren't allowed in commercial, although you see them dotted where they shouldn't be. But the only way they're allowed is if you put an exterior facade on them that match the building. And I always get well, we have a metal building. Can't we just paint it the same color? I'm like, no, make it the same metal building that you have. Because everybody knows what a Connex looks like. If you put a little roof on it and
Still
some,
comes.
yeah, it kind of is, but they're doing some really cool things with Connexes, piecing them together and mounting them together. So that conversation is going away a little bit, but.
Yeah.
So just for the storage of connexes.
Right.
Yeah. Tossed it.
So those are your biggies.
Okay. And we have. I'm just looking at the map. I see there's some industrial versus commercial, there's industrial versus residential. I don't think that's terribly well developed there next to the airport.
No, it's pretty much large tracts that.
What about industrial versus not in the city?
There's no buffer requirement for uses outside the city.
But if you buy a lot that backs up to the airport, you should know better.
Should.
Okay.
But communities have had to go to the noise disclosures to real estate closings because of
Oh.
naval bases and stuff like that, because they complain about the noise.
Well, you should, I mean, yeah.
So you can't assume people do the right thing, but yeah.
I mean, if you're within half a mile of the airport, you should know you're within half a mile of the airport. Should be a flight path. It's gonna be different in the summer. Come on, people. Let's see. There's a little industrial cluster up north there. And the wastewater treatment plant, I think it's just industrial because it stinks.
Well, and it's
And it's in a hole. Although there's residential right up against.
yeah, some of these have gone to a hybrid of an apartment and a commercial, like an auto repair shop or something like that. They're kind of taking advantage of that, but there's still a couple homes out there, which I find interesting, but they're probably not on city sewer either. That's really the funny thing. I don't know that to be true, but I wouldn't be surprised.
No,
Gotta smell it. But you don't get that.
so. Yeah, I guess. Brown areas, the dirt.
Oh, residential multifamily.
Oh, okay. Got it. And the purple ones,
There are two, 1 and 2 family.
okay.
And then the yellows are single family, and this is that
Rural
weird
residential.
hybrid of commercial and residential, depending on where you are.
Enjoy your farm.
Yeah. No, do not enjoy your farm.
There's some of them out there.
There are. No, I'm just saying the neighbors. It's interesting. Even with large lots, they're very resistant to the typical behaviors and animals that people would have on larger areas. Kennels are sore spots. Yeah.
I'm just trying to think. That's Spruce in the north end of town.
Yes.
This Lucas is,
Listen. Running by the gray.
oh, is that Lucille?
Nope.
No, Lucille's further.
Seals.
Right. Yeah, it's a mile off from each other.
Right, yeah, Seals here. Lucas is here and Church is here.
Okay. Because I remember if you went up Lucas till it ends,
Mhm,
Turn
looks like
left.
all industrial.
well, Lucas till it
Oh.
ends, turn left, there's some farms up there.
Oh, yeah.
Have been for as long as I can remember. Dorothea is the name of one of the streets. That's the. So there's some farms tucked in there. In fact, I think one of those farms has a registered cemetery on it. So there's some interesting stuff tucked in your city that we just don't know about. So I guess it comes down to is, are we being too detailed for things that don't exist? So. Peter,
Yes.
how many layers do you think we should put into this? I mean, keeping your job simple.
So I think I'll rewind a little bit then is that, so between commercial and industrial, no fence, they can choose to put one in. So fencing is just out of there. So we're just requiring a minimum planting for those widths. Do we want to allow them to reduce the width of 15 feet or 20 feet if they do put in a fence?
I would say yes.
Okay, so then and Tino, I'm making notes on this, so I'll make another version of this. So for both commercial and industrial, we'll modify that if they put in a 6 foot tall site obscuring fence and defined as being 95% site obscuring, then they're allowed to reduce it by 5 feet in width.
How hard is it to do 95%? Is that cyclone fencing slats?
No, it's there's a slat. The typical slats you put into chain link don't do it. They get you about 80 and 90. There's actually a product that has flexible edges that you put into chain link. It's a readily available product, and it's meant to be a less expensive version than a cedar fence with overlapping slats.
So it's readily doable. It's not onerous.
It's readily doable, yeah. And Tim, you were about to say something?
Yeah, I think a cedar fence to make it 95%, if you had a 1/4 inch gap between your slats, that's basically 95% opacity right
Yep.
there.
I know Kendall Ford used it. That's what they put along their northern boundary when they had to
That,
redo that project.
the chain link with those special slats.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't want it to be out of reach.
Right.
I mean, when you develop commercially, throw in some,
I think McKinley Fence provided that, but I can't swear to it. And they're right
Yeah, as
there.
I think, didn't Marie have a roll of
Yes,
fencing
she
in her
did.
truck?
Yes, she did.
To show you.
Yeah, she actually brought one in. So it's surprising what it does.
okay.
I mean, it leaks a little, but the neighbor that was, directly abutting them with all those cars going in and out said he was satisfied with the light blocking.
Okay, so,
Now he said, the elevation's good in his favor, so. But yeah,
sounds realistic to me then.
Right.
I mean, if it's a readily available commercial product, you don't have to pay to put up a block wall.
well, it's close, but if you type in 95% opacity chain link,
Oh,
I
okay.
think you'll get an example. I don't remember what company it
But
was.
it's,
I mean, it costs more than the
sure,
chain link with
Sure,
the
yeah.
cheap slats, but the
Yeah.
cheap slats don't hold up anyway. They always seem to get broken off and.
correct. I'm thinking about the fencing that's outside of the old police station, Macon, that they put in there, and it's, it's so. Okay, that sounds good. So, Peter, you're proposing you drop the buffer by what? By 5 feet?
Yep.
My question is,
The fence buys you 5. So for L2, it means that instead of 15, you've got 10. And for L3, instead of 20, it means that you get 15.
and L3,
Is the industrial commercial? But I thought we dropped the.
Well, the industrial commercial goes, is that going down to an L2 then?
I think it.
Or then
Um,
industrial residential?
Well, so the difference is that commercial adjacent to residential has to do the 15-foot bed. Industrial adjacent to residential has to do a 20-foot bed.
Right.
So industrial is L3, but commercial is L2.
Yeah.
For the purposes of this, yes.
So even for an industrial site, I mean, the ones that I deal with that are up off Mystery, they're looking for the maximum use of their storage yard too and vehicular turnaround. So what's your thoughts, Peter, on can you accomplish the same thing in less than 20 feet of a landscape bed or not? I mean, is it the width that matters or is it the quantity of plantings? And I know the width limits the quantity of plantings, but if they put a fence in and did, like Insurance Auto Auction on Mystery has spruce trees and they have the mugo pines that grow really tall like trees. So they pretty much screen themselves, and then they have the old fashioned slats. They were done under a previous code, but they pretty well created a visual barrier, between the natural and the fence.
Where's this at?
On Mystery, after you come off Lucas and you head west, toward
Great
Bumpus.
piece right up there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they're on the south side, the left hand side.
Yeah, I gotcha.
So you don't, it used to be as wide open, you'd see all the wrecked cars sitting there, but now it's grown up. It's been probably 5-7 years and it's grown up in height. And it does a pretty good job, but I don't think it's 20 feet wide. It may only be 10 feet wide because it's like a single layer, I think, maybe in a triangular or an offset pattern. Either
So
that or.
for the benefits of you folks, typically, if you want to plant a tree that it gets to grow into its awesome, cool final form, like a Colorado green spruce or a birch, you want them about 20 feet apart. After about 20 or 30 years, our evergreen trees are 15 feet wide. They get to be pretty big if they have the good soils. So the challenge with buffer landscaping is when you start to get too much stuff in, it competes a little bit, but it grows into each other. So I think the next thing, Tina, relating to the effectiveness of that is the quantification of how much material goes in there. The challenge when you get 20 feet, I think, is more than you need. 15 feet's probably pretty good to get good planting into it. And 10 feet, you can get away with it because let's say for industrial L3, we said do a 6-foot tall fence, you can reduce it by 5. Do an 8-foot tall fence, you can reduce it by 5 more, so you have 10 feet. If they're doing the planting on the inside of the site or on the outside, they're planting material a little bit more densely where you have spruce trees closer to each other. That means that you get 30 or 40, 50 years of a pretty dense vegetation until they start to drop their lower branches or they start to compete with each other. But for the life of that property until it gets redeveloped, it's probably meaningful. It's a long way to answer your question, but I think 15 feet is pretty good, but 10 feet in an industrial location, you would get a pretty dense landscape.
And what if they wanted to do a wall instead of a fence? Then,
Well, and with a wall, I mean, you get 5% more, right? And nobody's going to build a wall taller than probably 6 or 8 feet anyways, because the foundation for it gets to be pretty big.
Okay, so
That's
sorry.
cost prohibitive.
So then a question is, so a question for L3 is, we start with 20, a 6-foot tall site obscuring fence allows them to get 15, which I think is still fair. Does 2 feet of added height give them another 5 feet where they can make it 10 feet wide because they have a taller fence? And remember, this is between industrial and residential.
Have you seen it before?
Yes, probably yes. But for that, imagine if you're on your back deck at a house, so you're 3 feet or 4 feet off the ground, maybe if you're split level type thing with an industrial lot, that 6 to 8 feet height probably makes a big difference for how your eyes go out.
Sure.
And another question, like Tina's pointing back there, is how many places does this actually happen?
Yeah,
Right.
actually,
A little bit right there.
there's these 2 lots that are in a higher end subdivision, Jewel Estates. You come off of Miss Street and go up in there. So these 2 lots are undeveloped that are industrial. So whatever is decided and adopted is going to impact them. They have some separation. I think they're buildings. And I talked to the owner because these were like competing time wise as to how they were going through the process. So they're pretty close in age as far as the subdivision and the zoning. But there's like 100-foot setback for buildings already that's going to impact these 2. So they're really not going to be that attractive for a real industrial use, more of a hybrid. And then I think the materials can be closer, but there may still be 50-foot setback. So there's going to be some of that, but I think these are the only 2 residential lots. This one's residential, but it's actually owned by the guy who did the subdivision. I don't know why he didn't zone it industrial at the time, but he decided to build a duplex there at that dead end, which was crazy, but nonetheless, it happened. So, and these all want to go industrial. It's just a matter of getting the last few, holdouts, to come in. So there's a street there that stops it. There's these, but these are large lots anyway. And it's the edge of this is the Menard here.
Yep.
So they're probably gonna always retain a natural vegetative buffer that's bigger than what they want, because I think their trail system runs through there, but don't quote me on it.
And some of those are swampy.
Yeah, and then these are residential lots here. I'm trying to think if it's Kennedy that owns this or if it's the other gentleman that owns it. I can't think what his name is right now. He's got all those tiny homes in a row.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that.
I can't remember his name, but I think he's somewhere in here, maybe over here. So yeah, I think they're really the only ones that are gonna matter are these 2. So, I mean, you spent a lot of time talking about it, but it's gonna be very minimal. I don't think the city's ever gonna be positioned to actively rezone to industrial, because for property taxes, it doesn't generate it. For sales tax, it doesn't generate it. So it's not a win either way. And there's enough rural land that you can do it just outside the city. So I don't anticipate we'll capture much more, except for, like I said, some of these old non-conforming uses, maybe. And Lucas.
I think maybe we should just Peter, how about we just write up what you propose with the if then fence go up, it's narrower. And see how
I
it
like
sticks.
it. I
If-
like
If
it.
nobody likes it, they'll let us know. But
Yeah, the
And
fact that it
then-
has minimal
but-
impact, it shouldn't matter. I mean, I wouldn't think it would be a major sticking point for adoption.
And
Even less.
before I summarize is then my last question, I think for the site perimeter for you folks is, so currently for L1, which applies adjacent to rights of way for any use, there's one tree and then I converted it to 6 shrubs per 30 feet. So that's the same as existing code.
Right.
With buffer landscaping L2, I converted it and it's 1 tree and 6 shrubs per 30 lineal feet, but 1/3 of them need to be evergreen for the trees. So what I've always found interesting, Tina, is your buffer landscape wasn't necessarily denser than typical landscape. So a question for you is, if we're trying to, if we're not having fencing between commercial and industrial, but we want to try to have some benefit, it's 1 tree and 6 shrubs per 30 feet. Keep it the same as L1, except that it's a 15-foot bed? Or do you think that we should have more planting within that for that buffer type?
I'm just gonna tell you, my brain's hurting here, so I think I'm gonna have to plead with you guys to, can we call it an L1 and an L2 and then a B1 and a B, or whatever, B for buffer, L for landscaping? Because I
Perfect.
think
So
it's messing with my head as far as, because one of them is perimeter, one of them's between uses. So to me, L is the landscaping in your parking lot and along the street, and the
Yeah.
stuff between uses is your buffer. So
So
every
for
time
the-
you ask me the question, I have to reprocess, what does that mean? So,
Perfect.
sorry.
So I'll rephrase the question. I'll translate. So
Thanks.
for our L1 is 1 tree and 6 shrubs per 30 feet.
Right,
Then for our buffer one, I converted it to be that it would be 1 tree and 6 shrubs per 30 feet. It's roughly the same, except that it's adding a requirement for evergreen trees. And then buffer 2, the 3rd level, industrial adjacent to residential. The conversion is actually that it was fewer. It's that it's 1 tree and 5 shrubs per 20 lineal feet. Oh, sorry, it's more. So it's per 20 lineal feet. And then half of all trees will be coniferous. My question is,
coniferous requirement is for site obscurity.
yes, yeah, for winter screening.
Yeah.
So the question is, L1 is the least restrictive. It's 1 tree and 6 shrubs per 30 feet. Buffer 2, call it what you will. The industrial one is 1 tree and 5 shrubs per 20. So it's 1/3 more roughly. Should the one that's between the two of those be halfway in between, where it's 1 tree and 6 shrubs per 25 lineal feet? Because then that does add more planting for a buffer landscape.
So that would be between commercial and residential, for example.
Yes, yeah.
That seems like a logical step.
it does, and I don't like to complicate a table. But you have commercial uses and you have commercial uses. So Chris's business as an office doesn't generate any noise at nights and the weekend, and probably not even during the daytime, except for some cars pulling up and parking. So I would say that maybe you could even get subcategories between certain types of commercial and maybe call them low intensity, medium intensity, and high intensity. Because if you're next to Walmart, yes, there needs to be some serious buffering. If you're next to a doctor's office, minimal buffering, because you're just really doing visual, because there's really, you know what I mean, or something just to make it more attractive, or some kind of, yeah, or something, maybe a fence.
So let's call this one commercial buffer. So commercial buffer is between commercial and industrial or commercial. And we're saying you don't need to do a fence unless
Right.
you want to make it narrower. So it's really,
okay.
it's an aesthetic buffer. It doesn't really function as a buffer
Right.
due to how much there is.
I think most industrial properties going next to commercial would want to do, they choose the fence with less plantings over more plantings and a wider buffer. Just because, again, they want to maximize that storage yard and that vehicular turnaround area.
Yeah, so if we do, the fence removes real estate. It gives them more real estate to use. But it means that we need to figure out where the fence goes.
Right.
So a next step to them is
Property
maybe, like Tim was talking about before, is maybe a next step to this is to, in addition to putting up a fence, there's something else that lets them reduce the amount of planting, like maybe get rid of the shrubs.
Well,
Yeah, especially industrial to commercial. Yeah, I don't see any need for that. The trees kind of, like I said, it makes the track, it gives that visual barrier once they get up a little bit taller with that canopy. But yeah, I don't see what benefit the shrubs are between industrial and commercial.
And trying to think through the unintentional consequences. So one of the unintentional consequences, I think with this new code, the landscape for street landscaping being visible from the right of way. This would mean that on the sides of their, sorry, there's lots of ifs and ands and buts.
We need a whiteboard that we can all see.
there's always gonna be problems, but the more we can think of the better.
Yeah, because if we're talking between the uses, not along the road, then I don't know what point a shrub, and I'm just gonna full disclosure on that buffering standards. There was a lot of conversation when that got adopted. And there were, I'm not gonna, most of the time was spent on the perimeter and the parking lot with the islands and that kind of stuff. There wasn't a lot spent on that buffer, so I think that door is wide open to come up with what makes sense.
Yeah.
Because nobody's married to it or has any ownership of it.
Side to side, but when I look at commercial lots side by side, I don't see a lot of need for much, if anything. I
And
mean,
if the
one side,
commercial
one
comes
side of
in,
me is,
yeah.
is asphalt,
Mhm.
and there's a pedestrian right away through it too. So the other side, we put a fence up because of the neighborhood kids. Behind, now that's a different story, but that's commercial and residential.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I guess maybe if there was outdoor storage on this, in the side yard abutting the commercial, you'd want some kind of screening. But again, I still don't know what the shrubs are, because you're not trying to attenuate noise or
Nope.
any of that. It's more aesthetic and visual, blocking.
5 foot planting, then throw some trees in a cut.
Yeah. And with the calculations I did on the previous buffers A, B, and C, the number of shrubs decreased as you went toward the stricter standard, and the number of trees increased as you went toward the stricter standard. So that kind of reinforces that thought that the harsher your adjacent uses, the more you reduce shrubs.
So I just thought of something, Peter. So when we have, so I've got a raw lot, example, and I'm going in next to another commercial use. So commercial versus commercial. If I'm going up against a parking lot, why can't I have a parking lot? If I'm going up against their vegetative buffer, or their nice, pretty commercial space, shouldn't it mirror? There should be, there's some sort of required mirroring. What makes sense? Just because I'm trying to make it simple to get the results we want.
Well, Peter was leading toward putting that perimeter landscape bed along the perimeter of the entire parking lot last time, or you introduced the idea. I'll retract that and say you introduced the idea of some kind of landscaping along the entire perimeter versus just along the street. But right now, there's no buffer requirement between commercial to commercial.
Yes.
So that the buffer that would be created is if you went with the the idea, whatever. I'm too tired to
Right.
sugarcoat it. So sorry, Peter, I don't mean to be offensive. So anyway, the suggestion that you came up with last time about doing the perimeter, that would be how you'd achieve some kind of
Which
attractiveness between,
Yeah, but let's see.
it is written.
I
in-
see where it's nice and I see where it's not.
right?
And it's just like, how do you capture that? Because there's great utility in one and there's great utility in the other, but
So I think that you can, but like if there's a parking lot and your neighbor has a parking lot all the way up to this lot line and you want to go from there, basically, you would have ability to match his parking lot with your parking lot as long as you're meeting the interior parking lot requirements, basically, and your landscaping for your terminations, right?
Yeah.
So, and then meet your 15% requirement or whatever.
right.
But then if you end up like, you want to say his parking's oriented north-south and you want to go east-west, then yeah, you would need to have some sort of what, you're gonna have terminations anyway, but you would have to have your parking lot perimeter landscaping. I guess, I don't know how we codify that necessarily.
That's the thing is like. Maybe.
Well,
not.
so for coding it, so a good way to look at this is the sections we've been talking about so far for site perimeter are ignoring a parking lot. It's just talking about uses. So commercial to commercial, there's nothing that happens between them because they're expected to be roughly compatible. For the parking lots, Tim, you're spot on, is that if you did actually want to have cross-property circulation, then in those areas, parking lot perimeter landscape isn't triggered because you go across. In Anchorage, the way that they control that is shared parking access agreements. So if you wind up having two sites that operate as one parking lot, there's an agreement that needs to exist. Otherwise, you have to, on each property, put in an 8-foot landscape bed each side of the property without crossing over it. So for something like this, and this goes back to the question that I'd asked, is there's a great aesthetic benefit to break up parking lots, and a good place for that to happen is at the property border. So if the code says that all parking lots between the parking lot and adjacent properties will be parking lot perimeter landscaping, 8 feet wide, unless there is unless the owners of the parcels want to provide vehicular access in a safe manner. But Tina, I know the one thing that for you folks is Anchorage has different permitting processes that you guys don't necessarily have. So anything that we do has to be consistent with your review and enforcement. Is there anything that exists out there that you have any say in people crossing property lines with asphalt?
What we have is a comprehensive plan policy that says you're supposed to do shared access point and do internal, that connection, that interconnectivity. It doesn't define how. We haven't gotten to the level of mapping that out in the actual code as to how to do that. That happened a few years back. That was something Archie was pushing for something. I'm not sure. The downtown overlay has that interconnectivity requirement, where possible, you should design it in such a way so you can have those connections.
Okay.
So we do have that, and then we have shared parking agreements, where somebody has excess parking, somebody needs some parking, you can do a shared parking agreement. So we do have some mechanism. It's not something we use all the time, but.
Okay.
I think it would be a good idea to follow Anchorage's kind of example there, because then you can have an agreement recorded against the property that's always there, so you can never have ownership change. And then have that person be able to modify their landscaping, and now your whole situation's out of whack, basically.
And I know that's a real driver in Anchorage is people are trying to make sure that properties are developed for the future.
Right.
Instead of just a peculiar need for the current person.
Our worst example here in the valley is between Walmart and Valley Cinema. So Valley Cinema wanted to do the connection. Walmart said, nope. Now, to give Walmart credit, I think it was still far enough back where the Walmarts were less
wanted to be.
Yeah, they weren't as amenable to that kind of thing, those kind of agreements. I think they're probably more so now than they used to be. Used to be, they were, they didn't give anybody anything. But, and at that time, so we lost that opportunity. So you have to drive out of Walmart, get on the road and go down and then turn. And, yeah, so it was kind of a lost opportunity, which I think that may have been a driver too in our change, but.
Some people still.
Yeah, in the wintertime you can do it.
And a tangent to this as well as our discussion last week, which I've been mulling over, is that so we had talked about snow storage. So parking perimeter landscaping. So we've talked about our site perimeter being 8 feet. It might actually be wise to have parking perimeter landscaping be 10 feet unless wheel stops or curbing or something is provided, because that extra width, even recommending people put the planting on the property side, starts to create that area for vehicle overhang and snow storage.
Now, the perimeter that you're talking, or between the lot lines, the parking lot landscaping, is that just trees or is it trees and shrubs? What does Anchorage require?
Trees and shrubs.
Okay, so it is both. Yeah, I was looking, I pulled like 4 or 5 communities based on, I think I did it this weekend and I haven't distributed it. But they did the very thing you're talking about. In certain areas, they showed 10-foot width and they showed as their snow storage areas.
Okay.
And I know when I was just dealing with City Center, they're building their last 2 buildings out. And so they have some perimeter landscaping that they're putting in to meet the 15% landscaping for those areas. And so what we had talked about was grouping and clustering their trees and shrubs to give them those areas that they could push into right at the end of the drive aisles, where there were no shrubs, no trees, just a grassy area. You could go push it in there. At the end of each of those rows, designing them that way. So they were going to break their curb so that they could do that. Wouldn't even have to lift them over a curb,
Smart move.
Yeah.
And Chris, for your direct experience, so within your parcel, is that, let's say that at the head of the parking stall there is a 4-foot open space, knowing that if we have 20-foot long stalls plus 4 feet of landscape, it kind of gives you 4 or 5 feet, maybe 6 feet if you come into the parking a bit to do a little bit of a mound. On a typical winter, is that meaningful?
I'm gonna have you rephrase that so I can build a picture in my head a little clearer. So if we're talking like in my space right now, I can tell you that the landscaping has been covered and it's encroaching into the lot just because we ran out of spots to store. And that, so I have, if I address it from the south side, so we have the Bogard Road, and we'll ignore the drainage ditch and the trail. So I have a bit of a mound. It's kind of a serpentine mound along the southern edge. That's my shrubbery. And on one end, it kind of curves up. So towards the entrance, parking lot entrance. And then it's grass until the parking lot. So that grass area, even though it's not entirely our snow storage, gets used as snow storage because we're out of spots to do it. So my concern is, plow guys are gonna do what they're gonna do because it's 3 in the morning. Go. But if I'm forced to put shrubbery along that border between the parking lot and that, it's all gonna get destroyed in the first good snow.
Even if it's 5 or 6 feet back from the edge of curb.
No, not then. I mean, if it's,
Okay.
I mean, right now, but right now, like my design has, my proposed design for next year has shrubs right along the asphalt all the way across, because it's supposed to be the visual barrier.
Yeah.
Well, in fact, I have a visual barrier further back.
Okay.
They need some development. Could be a visual barrier. So addressing the code so that there's no determination where that visual barrier is, as long as it's there, then allows some design, when you look at it and go, hey, let's push our snow, surplus snow here, even though my snow storage is, over here in the corner, but it's full. It's full,
Yeah.
everywhere's full. But to protect the landscaping, I would much prefer that all to be just grass.
Yeah.
And then from that, I've got a not gravel, it's landscape rock about yay big. All that bed. So it does get pushed into there. Most of the pushing that occurs is not full force off the plow. It's stuff tumbling in, and then it doesn't really affect the shrub much at all.
Okay.
Do they lift their blade over your parking stops? Okay.
Well, before the new sign was developed, it was just dirt.
Oh, you didn't have the parking stop.
We didn't have parking spots, so they just pushed it wherever they wanted.
Oh,
And we did okay, but there was areas where it would pull gravel up and put it in the grass, and so we worked on cleaning that out. Fortunately, my landscapers now have this great brush, and they just blow it all out. It's cool. But
So then, and Tina, and this is where things are starting to come together, is that with the design that precludes headlights in a parking lot from raking the road, this might be one of the ones where what we're trying to limit is staff needing to review stuff that isn't formulaic. Because it seems like the options for this, for a parking lot perimeter, would be a 10-foot wide bed with the site obscuring hedge located like 4 feet away. Or if they put in a small, if they make their ornamental fence a site obscuring fence or a small barrier or something within that area, that there'd be some design options that would allow the flexibility to control headlights.
I have basically a 18-inch to 3-foot rise from parking lot deck up.
Yes.
With shrubbery on top of it. And I don't
And
know
that would be
how-
the key. And the key thing for that is that, someone submits a section to illustrate that you have your headlights and a slope, and how your site addresses headlight issues.
How do you address that?
yeah, Peter, I think, one of the things that, I know the hedge was added in the last time. That vegetative hedge between the parking lot and the road. And I think where we missed the mark was, we maybe should have just eliminated the shrubbery requirement. The flowers are in the mix anyway, but now that they're going out of the mix, I don't know why you wouldn't just eliminate the shrubs separate from the hedge and just have that hedge and with a tree space between them,
Yeah, just
because it's gonna, and then.
address the section.
You're on
allow
you're we're all starting to row in the same direction. This is great. So the key thing for that is that, so going back to the 1 tree per 30 and 6 shrubs per 30, in order to achieve, when you plant your shrubs, that they'll grow into each other in a reasonable amount of time, you probably want them 30 inches apart or so. So where you have a parking lot with headlights that will inflict pain on drivers, you change the multiplier to be like 8 shrubs per 20, in order that you have a requirement that it's the shrubs equivalent to a hedge in it. So instead of having your 6 shrubs per 30 plus a full hedge, you allow them to do double duty.
Right, yeah, no, and that makes total sense, and I think that was just something that didn't get caught, and that was just a learning curve out of that code.
Because and I have shrubs that are,
Oh, yeah, yours are huge.
I have some that are 8-9 feet tall.
Mhm. Plus you have that
Sure.
berm in some
And
places.
so it's like you walk out there and it's like,
And I've seen it's outside the city, but that one of the Amber Ridge apartments off Cottle Loop, they put like a 3-foot stone wall. And then they had some trees with grass in front of it. And so that does the same thing as putting shrubs. So I think you could potentially allow some kind of decorative wall to substitute even for the shrubs. Or it could be a mix of pieces of walls, shrubs, to
So,
give some options.
give you the formulaic option of this, or show me how you're going to meet the site
Right.
barrier along your end.
Right.
And something to consider as well. So in Anchorage, the only time they're concerned about the raking of the headlights is for drive-throughs. Because between a drive-through and the road, normally there's no parking. So that's directly where there's no parked cars or anything. That requires staff or director approval. And they're only concerned where the vehicle's actually turning. When it's parallel to traffic, it's just like normal driving. But where they have that turning part is where it becomes distracting. And that might be a refinement with this as well, because when a vehicle's parking or pulling out and it's perpendicular to traffic, it's not as much of an issue. Buffering it is good, but it's really where you get that turning motion.
And it's constant. So what does Anchorage use for parking lot buffering versus right away? Is it more stringent than ours, less?
No, so what it is that so similar to what we're talking about with the L1. So L1 site and L1 parking are identical, except that L1 parking reduces some design options. And then what happens is that, so if those are both L1, and then if for your site, if any of the buffer landscapes come into effect, they take precedence over the parking because they're a stricter standard than the parking. So, and I'll give an example of that is, let's say that you had industrial parking adjacent to residential. Normal parking perimeter would be 1 tree per 30, but then it would actually require the buffer where the fence would have to go in, everything would have to go to match that buffer requirement. And that really doesn't make sense because you have to do it anyways, regardless of parking. So never mind.
But there's probably some scenario where that works.
Yeah, well, Anchorage
Yes,
more.
and I think it's one thing that we've noted within Wasilla code is it doesn't state anywhere that the more prescriptive, if another more prescriptive standard covers this area, the harsher standard applies. They don't multiply.
Yeah, I saw you added that in there. I like that.
Yeah, that's important.
And I like that you added the rounding as part of the table too, so that you took that off the table.
So
And
that's
Less
hilarious.
than one. I thought that was funny.
Well, what's funny, I had a meeting with code people here in Anchorage like a month or two back, and I was like, because they've had the new code for like 5 years, I didn't know they spelled this out. So they said, oh, it's in the definitions. And I'm like, yes.
Love definitions. Bring them on. Okay.
So then what I'll reiterate then, so the next version to this table, so for L1, as a next step is 8 feet with the minimum average, etc. 1 tree and 6 shrubs per 30. Not too many of any given species, and that'll apply to all of these. And then within industrial zoned areas, there's a optional design standard. Then for our first buffer, which I'm calling L2, it's going to be 15 feet wide. It requires a fence next to residential, but between commercial and industrial, it does not, unless you want to trade some land for that. And then what I'm going to show is 1 tree and 6 shrubs per 25 feet, just to get it a little bit more dense. And then I'll figure out a note in there to reduce the shrubs to run past you guys once I've to make it parallel to what you had before, Tina. And then our second buffer, which is shown as being L3, is 20 feet of planting, fence being required next to residential. If you want to reduce it by 5 feet, you have to put in a 6-foot fence. And then for this one, it's 1 tree per 20 feet, and then we'll figure out the shrubs. So that would get L1, L2, and L3. And then for parking lot perimeter landscaping, which we were just talking about, that'll match L1, but it'll have more language about headlights, and it'll make it a little bit wider to it'll make it wider if you need to accommodate snow storage. But if you put in something special like a wall, it might give you that 2 feet back. And then parking lot interior landscaping, which we haven't talked about yet, basically stays the same as what it is right now. And then ignore the optional design standard. I think that was put in there from Anchorage. I was mixing my tables up. And then probably on parking lot interior landscaping, that's the quantification. And then the last one to make sure it's in there is 15% miscellaneous landscape is required, but there's no quantification for it. So, and Anchorage as well does not have quantification for it. So this might be one where Tina, I was going to look at a couple of recent projects to see if there was a formula where, like, for every 1,500 square feet of miscellaneous landscape, there will be one tree, unless that area covers the perimeter. So like any miscellaneous landscape that isn't used for another code purpose would contribute a specific amount, maybe.
Nope. Yeah, that was one of my notes. I was like, can we quantify that? It would be really helpful.
Yeah, and an example for that, everyone, is if 15% of a property is 10,000 square feet, because of our site perimeter and parking landscaping, let's say we have 5,000 that counts for those. So the 5,000 that's left that doesn't have a quantification for it. So we might say something like 1 tree per 1,000 square feet. So that would mean 5 more trees. And we might do similar for shrubs as well. And that's all of table number 2. And I think the only other thing that we would discuss would be, I'm going to take a couple things out of this table that relates to species maximums and just put those in general notes that apply everywhere. And then Tina, whether now or as a follow-up for excluding columnar species and similar from parking lots. That's just something that I disagree with, but I understand why you have it in there.
Well, so what, you're going with an optional design standard. Why don't you include it there? Because that's one thing that Maria said, and we haven't found a site that fits, but that doesn't mean there isn't one that it's not going to make sense for. If it's a tight spot, if it's for a turning radius or, for a truck in a loading zone, then you can do an alternate, one of those kind of trees. But in a normal, typical parking lot that's got the normal widths, then you go with the shade tree. Otherwise, you can do something else. Now, I think for your other miscellaneous landscaping, you could pull those in then. Yes, because I've seen the Parkland birch. Some people have liked that. I saw something interesting. It's UAA's parking lot, one of their professional studies building. Now they're a little different because they have I think it's like a boulevard going in.
Yep. And
then they have their parking lot with the landscape islands. But in the boulevard, in the median, in the middle, and you could do it along the edge of a drive aisle, they used those Parkland birch or something, or the columnar aspen. They used something like that, but then in the other areas, they were more shade trees. So it's not about what I want and what I like, but I think the intent of that tree, that canopy is, again, it's a visual, it's an attractive thing. It's a stormwater, it's a rain disperser. It does a lot of the good things, the reason you want that bigger canopy. But there's always some tight spaces, and I don't want them to have to go to the planning commission because there's a tight space.
Perfect. And that could also be the optional design standard would be, is it using a higher quantity of them in a particular area, something like that.
Right.
Okay. So for table 2 then, any questions or comments until I distribute another draft?
Peter, the only thing is that in the L3, it's only industrial now, so it would require a fence. Is that correct? There's no option not to have a fence with industrial.
Industrial next to commercial doesn't need a fence.
Gotcha.
Based on what I heard from you folks.
Yeah, no.
Okay.
Industrial versus residential, yeah.
Then the next sheet was the table 3, which goes away because we don't have that table to talk about buffer landscaping. And then table 4, this is just a new way to look at your table, Tina. Is that
I like it.
So we have 4 uses, and then I think we might have a 5th use is for storage on this, Tina, for buffer.
Yeah, I think we need to add one unless you think it's adequately covered, but it's probably better to put it here. I noticed number 2. It says outdoor sales and display, but it says in industrial zoning district, but we also have some allowed in commercial, so we'll have to break that. I mean, it'll have to be addressed there. And then
Okay.
gas stations across from the residential zoning was neat. I didn't see it captured, so I don't know if
And-
we're gonna run into that, but it could.
Perfect. I'll have a look at that again. We might have gotten gung ho. And then what I noticed as well is that for drive-in businesses,
Mhm.
the first 2 minimum requirements are the same, so those would just be combined.
Yeah, no, I like the way you did it. I was telling Tim earlier. I like the way you took all of that big 2 pages of charts and then just,
Wow.
yeah, made subcategories, makes it a lot easier. And then if you want to add in what you talked about the drive-in business, about that screening for the headlights when you're doing that turn, because
Perfect.
this may not incorporate what you were talking about.
Perfect.
Yeah, I think that's actually kind of a weird loophole kind of in the code, is that you don't have to screen a drive-through, but you would have to screen a parking lot, right? That,
Well,
You don't
right now
screen
you
the
have
end
to
of the
screen.
drive-through. You screen the end.
Right now there is screening, so if there's a residential lot, so
okay,
we have it up here at
that's the right way.
Lucille and Nelson. So the corner lot on the northeast corner is commercial and the northwest corner is commercial. On the northeast corner, there's a residential lot right there, and they were proposing a drive-through pointed. At one time, the headlights were pointed right at the residential. So it does require some buffering.
Yeah, I was thinking up against the right way, not
Oh, right, yeah.
Jason.
So maybe it's a sub condition. Drive-in business
Yeah.
adjacent to
Or-
the right of way for that turning radius. I don't know. It may not make sense to put it there.
Yeah, I've got it on my list here to figure out where it might go. That's easy.
Yeah, maybe just put it with the parking lot perimeter and say, park, to screen from light to the right away, parking lots and drive-throughs or something like that shall be
Yeah.
screened.
Depending on what they're crossing. Yeah. Like Kane's drive-through. He goes across to the railroad track.
Right.
Nobody cares.
And then on this table, then,
But as you turn that, then
it
it
kills
matters.
and to confirm intent, Tina, then, so in this table for drive-in businesses, was the intent of this to deal with headlights going through the drive-through?
Yeah, mainly, and the parking lot, any of that kind of.
Okay,
Obviously, some drive-in businesses have more business than others, and it depends on which way they point them.
Right.
Okay.
So they could design it so it's not pointed toward the neighborhood.
Or.
and then for outdoor sales, that's really the visual distraction of
Yeah, it's-
all the crap.
Yeah.
Okay,
So rather than saying drive-in business, just say businesses with drive-through windows or something like that, because you want to apply it to anything with any
Yeah.
drive-through, right?
Because it's
Whereas-
food, banking,
Right.
pharmacies sometimes.
Whereas the drive-in, just saying for a drive-in business makes it kind of sound like it's all they do is drive-in.
Got it.
That's really all it counts.
Business with a drive-through. Or something else, gonna be raking headlights across all the night long.
yeah, a drive-in business sounds like an old A&W where you
Yeah,
get your,
right.
the rollerblader.
Sonic, that's it, it's the only one. That makes sense.
And then parking garage obviously is just trying to make the parking garage less horrid. Do you guys have a parking garage yet?
Nope,
No,
not yet.
And I like the fact that for outdoor areas, it's associated with pets or children. They're the same thing.
Put them both on a leash.
they're both nuisances at times. We
Okay.
passed on a house because it butted up next to a daycare. I'm like, oh, yeah, no.
No, that's some noise you can't get rid of.
Whoa.
So thank you for humoring my table OCD. I think that deals with a fair amount of the list of things, Tina. And I know that we're getting to be 6:30. Did people want to talk about anything else?
Let me ask you this. So tables like this, from your professional opinion, does it make your job simpler, cleaner?
Yeah. And
Okay.
and the process for me is by going through code to develop tables, you see the hierarchy and it helps you pull things and get them into the right place. So I think this will be quite useful because now with the code section, when people open it up, there'll be the intent section, which grounds people in why it's here. Then these tables will be there to say what you need, how you quantify it, and then there'll be a couple of sections after that that give a bit more information maybe. But this gets rid of a lot of the text in that section.
It's confusing.
Good, nice job.
I like it.
I like it too. Thanks, Peter.
Really?
That sounds like that answers my question, but just to double check. So the tables are replacing code language, not adding to them, right? Okay.
Yeah, what I see within this, oh, and another good thing to note is the street trees section, Tina, is gone with this
Right,
because
yeah, 'cause you don't need
you're because you don't need it, but make sure there wasn't something in that section that was critical to street trees, because
Okay.
otherwise that would happen within the L1 line
Got it.
to reiterate a particular use.
Okay,
The street tree stuff is particularly important for the downtown town over there, right?
Right, but we don't.
But we're not in that.
We're not
but
touching
there's
it.
a street tree component here
Yeah, there
too,
is.
but I think it is redundant. So I like what you did, Peter. Cause it made it sound like it was extra, but then it said somewhere else, no, it's not extra, it's the same. So it
Yeah.
created that confusion
Even
there.
if we put words in there that says this fulfills our
Right.
street tree requirements.
Right. Yeah, so I like the way you just combined it together and then you don't have to call it out separately.
And I don't know where it lives, but often street trees are considered to be required within the right of way, that adjacent parcels aren't necessarily responsible for them. But for the purpose of what you're doing, these trees provide that street tree feeling.
I think we have to make sure we're clear on street trees underneath power lines will be mowed down.
Yeah, you had a note in there about the utility, didn't you?
Yeah, and so that came from Anchorage, where Anchorage allows you to substitute large shrubs directly for trees. I think you have that as well, don't you, Tina?
We actually don't require a substitution. It just says if you're under the power line, you don't do the trees, you just do the
Okay.
shrubs. It didn't require larger ones, so that actually increases the requirement, which I don't know, you guys can weigh that out as to if you think that matters or not, but
Well, most of us,
And we don't have that many shrubs that are in excess of 6 feet tall, so it normally winds up being lilac or a small tree like the amber maple. So that's something to consider. And again, I think that for this, beyond other things we should hit first, the next thing to this is looking at the repercussions of text like that and getting into the weeds a bit.
hey, Peter, I just heard something come out of your mouth that I think you're being very kind about. You said smaller trees like amber maple. I can tell you that the guys cutting down the trees in front of my office can't tell the difference.
Well, hopefully the guy planting them,
and around them.
They cannot tell the difference.
and that's why, as I know, the previous meeting when someone from wasn't there someone from, no, I'm thinking about another meeting. So if we can talk to someone from MEA.
Oh, I did. So that's what I was gonna add. The language that's in there, I emailed it to the gentleman that was working with the crews cleaning. And he says, as written, it's perfectly fine.
Okay.
Okay, because that's what I wanted his feedback is when we changed that, I said, I thought we got with you to make sure. And he said, yeah, that complies. So if you require more or closer or anything, we're gonna butt heads with them on that.
Okay.
So you just keep that in mind. He did say, we don't like shrubs under the power lines either, but if we can tell they're shrubs and they look like shrubs, we just kind of turn a blind eye and don't see anything. Because they can park their truck out and reach, but
Right.
they won't, they're not forgiving at all with a tree.
Perhaps we may mention something that they should keep, make sure that there's access to power poles. because I know from.
Oh, right, yeah.
There's, I have my shrubs, but they die back and come this side of the power pole. Well, the other day when they're blowing sparks out of the power line above me, they showed up with 2 trucks, butted right up against it. They got up there and we never even saw a flicker. They just fixed it and left. So making sure that the utilities have access with the truck is gonna save you from them doing it anyway.
Well, and equipment boxes too, because some people put them out in the, I don't know why they choose to, but they put them out at the road. Right there in that easement, and then if you're planting shrubbery too close, they get testy about that too.
And then just come in there and great, it's gone.
Yep.
Mine's fine.
So I'm not sure ours has an exception for keeping that area cleared, you know.
And that reminds me as well, so we haven't yet gotten to the section that relates to utilities or other screening required for loading zone or utilities. And those as well might be able to be integrated into a table or similar, or they just become a standalone section. Or stay as such. Yeah, the things that are always out of control is people always put the transformers in the most visible, ugliest spot. They always want to be stuff really far away from them. But after talking with an electrician that they use 10-foot hot sticks to turn these things on and off, I can understand the setbacks because an arc fault can vaporize you.
Oh, wow.
Yes, they can.
Ooh,
They're not pretty at all.
thanks.
No, they need room. The other thing I learned is because I had to pay a godly amount to move a transformer about 30 feet. They have to be able to back a truck up to it.
Oh,
So the way it's sad is I had an air handler between the access and they said no. And so because I created the barrier, I got to pay to move that chicken. Nice. Do that, or they say, well, you just cannot have power, which we do prefer. And so we say, well, I guess we're moving it. But on the same note, it's still behind the building just enough so that you really can't see it. It's just kind of there. It's back there. But they can back a truck right up to the nose of it. Are we happy with where we got tonight?
Yes.
Okay. Any objections to leaving committee of the whole? Hearing none, we're out of committee of the whole. Any public comments? Oh, I don't hear any. Staff and committee comments,
just a reminder, the next meeting is March 6th.
2 weeks from now. Well, yes, 2 weeks from yesterday.
March 6th.
On Monday, correct, thank you. Do we have a meeting scheduled past that?
No, so I don't know if you want to wait till then or if you want to do it now.
Peter?
I think the 2-week intervals is handy if it works with people's schedules. We're within vision of the end, I think. Do we want to do 2 weeks after the 6th?
I'm good with that.
I can tell you this right now. I'm not gonna be there. 2 weeks on March 20th. It's 2 days before my wife's birthday, and I will be somewhere a lot warmer.
Oh, I won't be here either.
Great.
So, yeah, you can blame me. It won't be you. I won't be here
I can
the
do
last 2 weeks of March,
I can do
actually.
April 3rd. But here's the thing, can we,
Man, we're getting late.
right, if we schedule for April 3rd, can we cancel it if we don't need it? We get everything done next week?
Mhm.
So
So
how about,
what a question I have, Tina, procedurally is there are certain things, there are certain changes that we have made that will make people really happy and won't be contentious, like the shrub sizes, that kind of thing. The other parts of this, which are more comprehensive, do you think that they will create additional review effort? Should we almost do this as 2 stages, or what's your opinion?
Well, I mean, that's what we did January of last year was took some quick fixes, the low hanging fruit. So you guys are approved to work through the summer. I mean, I'm not saying you want to, but you have some time. So if you wanted to wrap up at the next meeting, those low hanging fruit, we can push those forward. Yeah, it's part of like a phased approach. So these are the easy, quick fixes that we've come up with, and we've got a few more that'll come through as phase 2. That way you don't lose the benefit in case for some reason it gets delayed.
Well,
But everyone we've allowed to redo or to revise, I mean, it's a cost, yes, but they can amend their landscape plan and go under the newly adopted code,
Right.
even if you're a little late. So keep that in mind too. So either way is fine.
let me ask you this. I feel like we've got the bulk of this cleaned up. When you look at this, Peter, do you look at it and go, man, I want to dig into that? Is there
Not
any-
necessarily. I think the only apprehension that I have is when we have it massaged, Tina's going to need to have some time in it to look for consistency or whatever other review is needed for it. And then it needs to go in front of the commission and in front of the assembly. I'm assuming that there's going to be at least one or two things we've done that will be a red flag, perhaps. I don't know the people in the commission right now or with the city, how are personalities and how are politics for this.
You want my opinion? I don't know the planning commission well, but much of the council, if there's enough people to show up and say, yeah, we like this, we're not gonna hear much.
Okay.
If you get a public outcry that says, oh no, you're gonna burn it all down, you're gonna make a mess, then you're gonna have a lot of no votes. But I think
So with that in mind, sorry.
tables have been having made things very clear.
Mhm.
If it's clearer, simpler, and shorter, but people can understand it, then I think the conversation becomes, well, you don't like it, tell me what it should read.
Yeah. And I think my opinion is we've made it smaller, more succinct. We have changed quantifiable items like plant sizing. We haven't increased anything. I think the only possible increase, and that's why I'm wary of it, relates to the parking perimeter. But that also kind of exists with the view from the right of way. So is there anything, so a question for everybody, is there anything else in this that you think might be a red flag for others? Or is everything for the good because we've reduced costs and simplified it?
What do you, you're the one that has some folks that are ready to start rolling.
I think it's looking pretty good. I mean, yeah, I think we've gotten a long way to making it simpler. Just like you said, these quantities. I think we might need to look at least the shrub quantity to kind of replace sort of some of the perennial, you know, reducing the perennials. I don't know. I'd leave that to you, Peter, if you think that makes sense, because we, you know, by dropping out the perennials, we reduced the cost quite a bit. Just right there. And then also on the same hand, I don't want to be proposing landscaping beds that aren't gonna look really sparse too. So I don't know how that ties into it.
Yeah, concentration's better.
Yeah, but then overall, yeah, no, I think it's looking pretty good. I can't think of what in particular we need to focus on, but I think it would be helpful to figure that out, to have maybe put a draft together where we're at.
And as I've driven around town, I've yet to see a split rail fence that is vertical right now.
Yeah.
They have all been pushed over.
I can tell you that, one, the planning commission's evolved just recently. I don't think they're going to be opposed to the reductions that the groups come up with. I don't think there's anything super scary in there, or,
I don't
you know,
think
something that's gonna,
close.
yeah, that's what I'm saying. I'm not sure that and like you said, the council's supportive of development, the planning commission is too. I mean, I just haven't heard anything that's that scary. You know, it's always, I'm always like, what are they gonna say this week? I don't know. Are they gonna say no landscaping at all? And then I'm gonna have to like go, well, I don't think that's the answer. And so I haven't
We all
got
agree
that.
that's not how this works.
Yeah, and so I haven't had any red flags even as the planner. So I don't think you're really gonna hit any going forward. I mean, I don't anticipate any.
Okay.
If anything, they'll say
So-
you didn't do enough. Why didn't you take away more? And then you just gotta say, well, we
You
think
guys take it away.
that's right. You think you can do better, you do it.
Maybe something that would be beneficial for review for the planning commission and city council is a couple of sketches, you know, this is where code was or is right now. And this is what we're proposing, and showing the plants, you know, just quantifying them out there, you know. Nothing
I
real.
think we could almost just show them 3 cost estimates.
There you go.
I got a
Yeah.
couple of those.
Yeah, and then that way that you have there's something visual to look at that, you know, hopefully hits on most of it.
Yeah, because what I anticipate doing from staff is what's been helpful in the past to the council and the commission, but especially for the council, because they don't deal with this as much, is what does the code say today? What's it going to? So that comparative table of the
Oh,
tables.
they always want.
And then that way it makes it easy for them to go, oh, you're just doing that. Okay, no, I don't care about any of this. And they can run down the list real fast. And then some of it gets a little bit more, you know, text, but for the most part, it's just that quick comparison. Yeah, I don't.
That answers my question. So I think that then for the next time we meet is it seems like a fair amount to get through it, but I think we can probably get through it substantively enough. So it's a question for you, Tina, is do you think by the end of another hour and a half that there'll be enough direction from you to have some magic with it? And then even if we communicate via email or drafts amongst our group. So that's a procedural question for you. Are we allowed to individually work on documents to get you comments?
You can, as long as
It
you,
goes back.
yeah, if you get it to me and then I'll farm it out to everybody. You can do that kind of work.
Okay, so
Yeah,
that's the way that we can collaborate.
Yeah,
So if we,
Okay.
is there a chance we can have the bulk of this compiled by the next meeting?
not by the March 6th. I can just tell you that my workload is,
That's why I asked.
yeah, it's just crippling right now. But I was thinking if the group could work through the last remaining issues on the March 6th meeting, you know, look over any edits that Peter does.
What do we
Identify
have
if there's
left?
anything else. Yeah, not that much. The guarantee, what do you want to look about that? Who inspects it at the end?
Okay.
That kind of stuff. You know, it's-
If we could you email us just what
Yeah,
those
what's
things are,
left, the
so we
remaining
know
things.
correct, to deal with that.
Yep, I could do that.
And then if you could just take your previous things and push them together
Yep,
of what we've already done. Which I'm not saying we have edits, but I know you've kept up on it. So if we could just have, here's what we still need to talk about, and here's what we've done, then we can throw it out on the table and go, yep, or needs polish.
right.
And then at that point, continue to push it together, get it ready to go to council.
Because I was trying to look and see if you did them April 3rd, was that what you had said? Would you do back
Monday in
then?
April, yeah.
Yeah,
I'll
that's
be
the
back.
first Monday. Because I don't think I have anything then. So if that would give me, the problem is I have a planning conference the last week of March. So I'm out of state, out of area.
Well,
So I'll have some work time, but not a lot. And then I had PTO ahead of that, but that's okay. But it would still give me 2 weeks before I left, at least to try and Peter, if you can get me your tables in a Word document. Or something.
So I've got them they're in an Excel document
Oh,
right
okay,
now,
yeah,
just to
that'll work.
make everything super easy.
Yeah, that way I can go ahead and start trying to fit this together and,
Yep.
Do that reorganization that was in the packets earlier. And then do that, strike through and edit, make sure that's all up to date. And then if you don't have it on the 6th, you'll have it sometime between the 6th and the 3rd. With the goal having it in your package, the week before so that you can look at it and come prepared to go, yep, that looks like we caught everything we want to catch or not. If I can get it sooner, I will. I just don't want to make promises I can't keep because.
Sure.
No worries. Yeah. Understand.
But unless we keep the momentum up.
Yeah. And then if we did that, the planning commission would be open to a second meeting. So let's just say everybody was good to go on the 3rd. That doesn't hit soon enough to go on the planning commission, although we probably could push it on the following week. No, I can't advertise it, but they would probably hold a second meeting in April. And then that gets us in front of the council, hopefully in May for those 2 meetings.
Well,
So
that'd
then
be
it's
good,
still
because
pretty
Ron's still
early.
thawing out in May.
Yeah, right. So there may be some redraws, but I would think if it's gonna save them a lot of money,
We'll be
2,000 in redrawing, they'd be glad to do that rather than planting.
Right.
Right.
400 shrubs.
And for the ones who don't wanna do, I mean, that just wanna go ahead and order their plants, they can go ahead and do that, and they can always revise it later if they want, take advantage of it. Cause some did, some didn't, even with the amendments we made in January of last year, some people didn't bother to revise it, they just said, nah, I'm just gonna do it. Well, it's a choice, you don't have to.
Sure.
That's, thing with perennials, you can have as many as you want. It's your choice.
So I will try and get you guys out at least a rough draft, maybe a rough draft. Let's see, where am I? Oh, I'm in April. Let me go back to March. Maybe I'll go back to March if it'll let me. So then it would be,
There's only a week left, in fact.
so maybe by the 17th, get you a rough draft, a rough draft.
Okay.
And then you guys can start trickling back,
Yeah.
thoughts, review it, give me some edits, and then I can
Yeah.
do it as they
Meet
go.
on the 6th,
Yep.
rough on the 17th. And then we'll meet again on April 3rd. April 3rd, still
Yeah,
good.
we'll look it over in that. period of time.
Hopefully April 3rd isn't good for me, but it does, I mean, it's all good.
Okay.
Hopefully I'll be at my son's nationals if you use it. this
Oh,
weekend.
wow.
National
State hockey,
Oh, boy.
the states this weekend.
You can call
That'd
in.
be cool.
Yeah.
She's like, oh, I call it. You,
Well, you can do your homework
You
assignment
call
ahead of time.
Okay, deal.
you can email us and we'll read your comments.
Sounds good.
I'm serious, whatever you want to do.
Okay.
Yeah, because by that time, we should have the bulk of it, so you'd either go, yeah, looks good to me, or, hey, everything except for I think we forgot to
Okay.
capture this.
Sounds great.
I-
Sounds good.
Yeah.
That's very doable.
All right,
Sounds good.
anything else? Anything else? Okay, we're adjourned at 6:49.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Peter.
Yeah, thanks.
Easy.
Steve.